Rain had followed Tessera Wren for 3 days, but tonight, it finally caught her. By the time she reached the iron gates of the Alpha King's castle, her patched dress clung to her like a second skin, and her shoes, already stitched twice at the sole, had given up completely, letting the cold in with every step. Her fingers, wrapped tight around the small cloth pouch at her chest, had gone numb an hour ago. She didn't loosen her grip. Inside that pouch was the only thing of her mother's she had left. She tipped her head back and looked up. The castle climbed into the storm clouds, black stones stacked into towers with no visible end, carved wolves along the roofline with their jaws tipped toward the sky, as if waiting for the next crack of lightning to howl back at it. Far above, one window burned gold against all that darkness, and Tessera wondered, not for the first time, what it must feel like to be warm. Everyone in the lower villages knew better than to come here. Ordinary wolves did not approach the royal seat of the Moonfang Dominion uninvited, and they certainly didn't come after dark, when the Alpha King's temper was said to run colder than his eyes. Tessera came anyway. She had nothing left to lose but the last promise she'd made to her mother, and she intended to keep it. She made a fist and struck the gate, the sound swallowed by the storm before it ever reached her own ears. She tried again, harder, until her knuckles stung, and still, nothing answered but the rain. She pressed her palm flat against the freezing iron and thought of the last thing her mother had ever said to her, 6 months ago, in a voice gone thin as paper. "If you ever see a man with white hair and red eyes," Maivra had whispered, closing the little silver pendant into Tessera's hands, "you find him. Only him. Do you understand me?" At the time, Tessera had understood nothing, except that her mother's fingers were too cold, and her breathing had gone strange and quiet. She understood more now. She had spent 6 months alone, asking every stranger who passed through her village if they'd ever seen a white-haired man with eyes like blood, until a peddler finally laughed at her and said the only man in the north who matched that description sat on the Moonfang throne. So she had walked. 11 days she had walked. She wasn't about to be stopped by a gate. "Oi, you, get back from there." 2 guards stepped out from the gatehouse, rain sliding off their cloaks, wolves in human skin, and twice her height. The taller one looked at her the way people looked at something the storm had washed up by mistake. "I need to see the Alpha King," Tessera said. Her voice cracked, but she didn't let it stop her. The guard laughed outright. "Course you do. Go home, little one." "I don't have a home." She held her ground, rain running down the back of her collar. "Please, I have something that belongs to him." "Probably a pouch of pebbles," the second guard muttered, already turning away. "Move along before you catch your death." Tessera didn't move. She planted her ruined shoes on the stone and stayed exactly where she was, shivering, refusing, until a third voice cut through the rain. "What's all this?" A boy not much older than her, apron tied twice around a thin waist, a crate of bread balanced on one hip, had come out a side door to see what the shouting was about. He took one look at her, soaked through, blue-lipped, immovable, and set the crate down. "She'll freeze out here." He glanced back at the guards. "There's a feast going on. Nobody'll notice one more small mouth if I bring her round through the kitchens." The guards argued, but not for long. A scene at the gates on a feast night was worse than one stray child slipping in through the back. In the end, the boy, Bramble, he told her, wiping flour from his palm before offering it to help her up the steps, pulled her in out of the storm. "Stay near the wall," he murmured, guiding her through a side passage that smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. "And don't touch anything. Not tonight." Tessera had never seen anything like the castle's grand hall. Heat rolled over her first, so sudden it stung. Then came the light. Hundreds of candles, gold and trembling, and beneath them, tables bowed under more food than her whole village saw in a season. Wolves in silk and velvet laughed and drank as if the storm outside didn't exist, as if cold and hunger were just rumors from some other, poorer world. Tonight the hall had been dressed for the anniversary of the Alpha King's reign. Banners and silver ribbons strung from every rafter. A cluster of children in velvet and lace turned to stare at her dripping hem, whispering behind their hands. Tessera felt her face go hot and dropped her chin, suddenly aware of every patch on her sleeve, every place her shoes had come apart at the seam. She hadn't come this far to be chased off by a room full of velvet and lace. Tessara barely looked at the rest of it, because across the hall, set on a black marble pedestal beneath the candlelight, stood a wedding gown unlike anything she had ever imagined. Ivory silk pooling in careful layers around its base, silver wolves stitched into the bodice mid-leap, tiny moonstones scattered like frost across the skirt and catching the light every time the air in the hall shifted. Something about it pulled her forward before she understood why. "Don't touch that," a voice warned, but Tessara was already crossing the hall, her wet shoes leaving dark prints on the marble, until she stood close enough to see the collar clearly, close enough to see the words stitched into it in careful silver thread. Maevra Wren, her mother's name. Tessara went colder than the storm had ever managed to make her. She turned, slowly, toward the front of the hall, where a silver-haired man in black had gone perfectly still, a glass of wine forgotten halfway to his mouth. His eyes were red, the deep, burning red she had walked 11 days to find. The room seemed to fold in around the two of them. Tessara lifted her hand and pointed at the gown. "Why is my mum's name on your queen's wedding dress?" The hall went silent all at once, as though someone had reached out and stopped every heart in the room at the same time. The king's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble. He didn't look away from her. He couldn't. Something old and long buried had clawed its way to the surface behind his crimson eyes, and for the first time in 12 years, his wolf rose up inside him and whispered a single name, Maevra. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. The shattered glass lay forgotten at his feet. For 12 years, Rhydian Vaust had trained himself not to react to anything. Not treaties, not threats, not the slow, patient hunger of a court that watched every breath he took for weakness. He crossed the ballroom now like a man wading through water, each step too careful, too slow, as if speed alone might shatter whatever this was before he understood it. He stopped in front of her. Up close, she was smaller than he'd thought, soaked through, shaking. Her chin stayed lifted anyway, refusing to look away even as the entire court held its breath around them. "What did you say your mother's name was?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Maevra Wren. The name hit him like a blade finding an old wound. 12 years ago, that name had meant everything. He had been a younger king then, certain the world answered to strength alone, until a rogue pack ambushed his patrol 2 days from the capital, 3 of them dragging him down at once, a claw opening his side to the bone before he'd even shifted. He remembered crawling out of the tree line into a village he didn't know, half blind with blood loss, a door opening before he could knock, a woman with flour on her hands, and a needle already threaded, pulling him inside before the rogues could follow his blood. Maevra had never asked his name. She'd simply knelt beside him on her kitchen floor and closed the wound with the same steady hands she used on torn hems and worn collars. His wolf had gone still the moment she touched him. Then it had risen inside him and recognized her, and never looked away again. He was the Alpha King. She was a seamstress, with patched sleeves of her own. The council called it madness. He called it fate, and told them plainly he intended to crown her queen, regardless of what their bloodlines said. He commissioned the finest gown the kingdom had ever seen, and told no one, not even Maevra, that he'd had her name stitched beneath the collar in silver thread. A promise sewn where no council could ever unpick it. That same night, he split a pendant in 2, gave her one half, and hung the other against his own chest, beneath his collar, where it had stayed for 12 years. He had never once taken it off, not even after. 3 nights before the wedding, Maevra disappeared. Royal documents vanished with her. Letters surfaced, forged, though no one called them that yet, showing correspondence with an enemy Alpha. A guard swore he'd seen her at the border, passing something into enemy hands. His council hadn't needed to convince him so much as confirm what grief was already whispering, that even a fated mate could lie. He had let them. He had told himself, every year since, that he'd let go of nothing that hadn't already let go of him first. Where is she now? The question left him before he'd decided to ask it. Tessara's throat worked. She died. 6 months ago. Her voice caught on the word, quick and small, like she'd learned not to let it show. Something in his chest went hollow. She raised me on her own, Tessara said, quiet now, the whole hall straining to hear her. She never once said a bad word about you, not one. Before she died, she told me you were the only man in the world she still trusted. She reached into her collar and drew out the small cloth pouch, working it open with trembling fingers. She said to give you this. She placed the pendant in his palm. Rhydian's hand closed around it, before his mind caught up to what he was holding. He knew its weight. He knew the exact curve of its edge, because he had carried its twin against his own heart for 12 years. He reached beneath his collar and drew out the matching half, and when he held the two pieces together, they fit as though they had never been apart at all. His breath left him in a single, ragged pull. 12 years of believing her a traitor, and she had died still trusting him, with the one secret that could undo his entire kingdom. 12 years, and she had never taken hers off either. Who is your father? The words came out low, almost a growl, and he watched her flinch before he could gentle them. He crouched instead, bringing himself down to her height, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone deliberately soft. It's all right. I only need the truth. Tessara looked up at him with eyes that were suddenly, unmistakably her mother's. Mum said he was somewhere he could never find us. The wolf inside him did not simply rise this time. It surged, claws lengthening beneath his skin before he wrestled them back. 12 years of grief, curdling into something closer to fury with every heartbeat. Somewhere he could never find them. The words circled him like a blade looking for an opening, and he could not make himself ask the question waiting underneath them, the one with his own name written all over it. He was still holding both halves of the pendant, still staring at the child who had his mate's eyes and his own stubborn chin, when the doors at the far end of the hall opened and the royal council swept in, summoned by whispers that had already outrun the storm. At the front of them walked Lord Auric Valen, silver-robed and composed, older than the king by a generation, already reaching for the calm authority that had steadied this court for 12 years. Then he saw the pendant, glinting between the king's fingers. His composure didn't crack. It simply drained away, all at once, leaving his face the color of old bone. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Maevra Wren's daughter had come home. Auric found his voice before anyone else in the hall did. Sire, this is madness. He didn't kneel, didn't so much as bow his head. The girl arrived unannounced, filthy, hours before the anniversary feast, and now half the court is treating her like a lost princess. She could be anything, an agent, a weapon someone else built to walk straight into your home. She is 7 years old. Rhydian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Say that again, and you'll answer for it. The wolf in his chest was still raw from the pendant, from the child's eyes, and it did not take kindly to being tested twice in 1 hour. Auric said nothing else, but he didn't look away either, and Rhydian filed that look somewhere he wouldn't forget. Behind him, the rest of the council shifted and murmured, already choosing sides before the girl had even been given a title. He sent his own guards that night, men who answered to him alone, not the council, with instructions to learn everything about the girl and her mother, and to bring back nothing but the truth. They returned within 3 days, tight-lipped and grim, and laid the report across his desk without a word. Maevra had lived under a false surname in a border village too small for anyone to ask questions. She had never remarried, never so much as courted another wolf. She had raised her daughter alone, in poverty, taking in mending from richer households and working a needle until her fingers bled to keep them both fed. And Tessara had been born almost exactly 9 months after Maevra disappeared. Rhydian read the report twice. The timing left no room for argument, only for the question he hadn't let himself ask yet. He found Tessara in the kitchens with Bramble, sharing a heel of bread, laughing, actually laughing, at something the boy had said. It was the first sound of childhood Rhydian had heard from her since she'd arrived, and something in him ached at how quickly it disappeared, the moment she saw his face. "Did your mother ever tell you who your father was?" he asked, crouching to her level again. The way he'd learned already seemed to help. Tessara considered this seriously, the way children do when a question matters more than the adult asking it realizes. She said he had white hair and red eyes, and that he was powerful, the strongest wolf in the north. A small, private smile. She said he loved her once, more than anything. She had never said his name, not the throne, not the kingdom, not the 12 years of silence. Only that he had loved her. Rhydian understood, all at once, exactly what Maevra had done. She hadn't hidden the truth to punish him. She'd hidden it to keep her daughter from growing up wanting a father who might never come. He stood before the full court that evening and said the only thing left to say, "This girl is my daughter." The hall broke apart. Half the nobles dropped to their knees before he'd finished speaking. An older noblewoman near the front was already weeping. A younger lord near the doors shouted about bloodlines and precedent. Others shouted for proof, for caution, for anything but the truth standing in front of them in a torn red dress. "Proof," Oryx said, the loudest of all. "You'll forgive the council for not accepting a child's word and a broken pendant as evidence for the succession of an entire kingdom." So they tested it the old way. An old healer drew a single line across each of their palms, with a blade blessed for exactly this purpose, murmuring words older than the Dominion itself. His and hers, pressed together over a silver bowl. The moment their blood touched, it didn't simply mix. It surged, violent and bright, filling the chamber with a scent every wolf in the room recognized in their bones, the unmistakable signature of the royal line. No one argued after that. Tessara watched the whole ceremony, with her chin lifted and her jaw set, exactly like her mother's. She didn't smile when the court began to bow. She looked, instead, like a child, waiting for someone to finally explain themselves. When it was over, she looked up at him with a question that silenced the hall, louder than the blood test had. "If you're really my father," she said, "why didn't you come for us?" Rhydian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 12 years of certainty had just been proven wrong in front of every noble house that had ever doubted him, and he had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse, even to his own ears. That night, alone in his chambers, the storm finally spent, and only the drip of rain from the eaves breaking the silence. He turned the mended pendant over in his hands and found what he'd missed 12 years ago. A seam along the inner edge, so fine it was nearly invisible. He pried it open with the tip of a blade. Inside, in handwriting he would have known anywhere, 4 words waited for him. "When the Moonstone calls, follow the dress." Rhydian didn't wait for dawn. He sent for Seraphine Door before the castle had finished stirring, in a private study far from council ears, the only seamstress alive who had worked the original gown thread by thread, stitch by stitch, under Maevra's exacting eye. She arrived wrapped in a shawl, silver-haired and stooped, and she did not bow. "I have nothing to say to you, Your Majesty." Her voice had the flat calm of someone who had rehearsed the refusal for 12 years. "I swore an oath to a woman. This court destroyed. I intend to keep it." Then she saw Tessara. Whatever Seraphine had prepared to say died in her throat. Her hand rose to her mouth, and her eyes, sharp, guarded eyes that had clearly given nothing away in over a decade, filled with tears. "Maevra's eyes," she whispered. "Maevra's exact eyes." She sank into the nearest chair, like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. For a long moment, no one in the room spoke. Even Rhydian, who had commanded armies without flinching, found he didn't know what to say to an old woman weeping over a dead woman's child. "Tell me about the dress," Rhydian said, once she could breathe again. "Not the silk, not the fittings. What Maevra actually put into it." Seraphine glanced at the door, as if the council might be listening through the stone itself. Then, quietly, "She didn't only choose the fabric, Your Majesty. She designed the embroidery herself, every stitch of it, and she wouldn't let anyone near the collar or the hem." I thought it was pride. Her fingers twisted in her lap. I know now it wasn't decoration at all. It was a pattern, a message, sewn small enough that no council eye would ever look twice. I noticed threads out of place once, years ago, and she laughed it off, as a slip of the needle. I believed her. I've regretted it every day since. Rhydian had the dress brought from the vault within the hour, and set upon its stand in the empty hall. Tessara approached it slowly, the way she approached everything in this castle, half certain it might vanish if she moved too fast. The moment her fingers grazed the bodice, the moonstones ignited. Not a shimmer, a blaze. Silver light pouring from every stone stitched into the silk, filling the hall, until Seraphine gasped, and the guards at the door took an involuntary step back. Somewhere behind them, a servant dropped a tray, and the crash of porcelain went completely unnoticed. Rhydian understood, with a cold certainty settling somewhere beneath his ribs, that this had nothing to do with grief or memory. Something ancient was answering his daughter's blood. Beneath the light, a seam along the collar sprang loose, and a compartment no wider than a fingertip clicked open. Inside, folded so small it had survived 12 years untouched, was a single scrap of parchment. Rhydian's hands weren't steady as he opened it. If she ever comes home, believe our daughter before you believe your counsel. He had to read it twice before the words made sense, and even then they didn't stop hurting. Maevra hadn't only hidden a truth. She had prepared, 12 years in advance, for the exact possibility that he would fail to see it on his own. Seraphine, watching his face, finally told him the rest. In the weeks before the wedding, Maevra had come to her in the middle of the night, pale and frightened in a way Seraphine had never seen. She'd learned, Seraphine never asked how, that the council was hunting for the Moonstone crown, an ancient relic said to reveal the true bloodline of the Moonfang throne. Whoever controlled it could decide, with absolute authority, who was fit to rule and who was not. Maevra had found it first. Rather than hand something that powerful to men, already circling her like wolves scenting a wound, she had hidden it and told no one where, not even Seraphine. Whatever you don't know, Maevra had told her, pressing both their hands together, they cannot take from you. They didn't destroy her because she was poor, Your Majesty. Seraphine's voice dropped lower still. They were afraid of her, afraid of what she was carrying. Her eyes moved to Tessara, standing beneath the dying light of the moonstones. There's an old prophecy the council never speaks of outside closed doors. A child of the true bloodline, born to wake what the crown had gone silent for generations. They didn't only fear Maevra had the crown. She let the silence finish it for her. They feared her daughter could wake it. Rhydian looked at Tessara, small and silver-eyed beneath a dress built entirely around her, and understood, for the first time, the shape of the war his family had already been fighting before she was even born. He didn't see Oryx in the doorway, but Oryx saw all of it. The light, the parchment, the old seamstress's tears. And when he finally slipped away into the dark of the corridor, he allowed himself 4 quiet words. The little heir has finally come home. Then he was gone, as quietly as he'd come, already reshaping his plans around a truth the rest of the castle hadn't caught up to yet. The days that followed were quieter, but not easier. Tessara had survived 11 days of rain and hunger, without flinching, but the castle itself seemed to defeat her a dozen times before breakfast. She didn't know which fork belonged to which course. She flinched every time a servant bowed to her, certain it was some kind of mistake that hadn't been caught yet. At her first formal dinner, she'd tried to eat the decorative lemon slice floating in her water glass, and the table had gone silent in a way that made her want to disappear into the floor. Silk-itched. Titles confused her. She kept waiting for someone to tell her the truth, that she didn't belong here, that this was all a misunderstanding about to be corrected. Rhydian noticed. He simply didn't know what to do about it. He tried, in the only ways he knew. He put a small ceremonial wolf sword in her hands and taught her the proper stance, correcting her grip twice before she got it right. More pleased than he expected, when she scowled in concentration, exactly like her mother used to over a stubborn seam. He noticed, without ever saying so, which piece of bread she always saved for last, a habit from thinner years she hadn't yet unlearned, and made sure it kept appearing at her elbow, still warm. During a storm that rattled the tower windows and made her flinch at every crack of thunder, She fell asleep against his arm without asking permission first, and he sat perfectly still for 2 hours, rather than risk waking her, something loosening in his chest that he didn't have a name for. "Did you love my mother?" she asked him one evening, out of nowhere, watching the fire instead of him, like the answer might hurt less if she wasn't looking at him when she got it. "More than anything," Rhydian said. It was the only question all week he hadn't needed to think about. Tessara nodded slowly, as if filing the answer away somewhere safe, and didn't ask anything else that night. Later that night, once Tessara was asleep, he walked the east corridor to the chamber Maevra had once kept, sealed, untouched, exactly as she'd left it 12 years ago. Her sewing basket still sat by the window. A half-finished hem still hung over the chair. Dust had gathered on everything, except, strangely, the window ledge, as if someone still came here sometimes, just to look out at the same view she once had. He remembered, standing there, the first time he'd seen her laugh. Not the night she stitched his wound, but the morning after, entirely unimpressed that the man wincing at her needle happened to wear a crown. She had never once asked him for anything. He had spent 12 years assuming that meant she had nothing left to want from him. He understood now how badly he'd misread her silence for guilt. The council summoned him at dawn. "The girl cannot be named Heir," Oryx said, flat and certain, without the Moonstone crown to confirm it. "A blood test satisfies superstition. It does not satisfy law. My daughter doesn't need a crown to be my daughter." The words left him before he'd measured their cost. Half the council went pale. A few, quietly, looked almost proud of him. The ones who remembered what he'd been like before grief hardened into policy. It was, Rhydian understood even as he said it, the first time in 12 years he had chosen anything over the throne's convenience. And he did not regret it for a single second. Seraphine found him afterward, breathless, a scrap of folded fabric in her hand. "There's a second compartment," she said. "Beneath the underskirt. I only found it because the thread finally gave." Inside was a small hand-drawn map, a winding path north, ending at a monastery Rhydian recognized instantly, and wished he didn't. "That monastery hasn't held monks in a generation," he said slowly, tracing the inked path with one finger. "The council used it once, before my father's time, when the Dominion still answered to older, colder laws. If Maevra had hidden something there, someone with old council ties might already know exactly where to look." He was already calling for his guard captain, when a scream tore through the corridor above. Tessara's room stood empty, the window thrown open to the night, her small boots still by the bed, as though she'd been lifted straight out of them. A servant's tray lay shattered by the door, tea gone cold across the stone, evidence of a struggle no one had heard over the wind. Painted across the glass in something too dark and too wet to be anything but blood, was a single symbol, a closed wolf's eye inside a broken circle. Rhydian had seen it only once before, stitched into the collar of Auric Valen's oldest allies. He had let the girl he'd only just found sleep 3 doors from Auric's own council chamber. He would not make that mistake twice. Rhydian did not shout. He did not need to. The wolf beneath his skin rose so fast and so completely that 3 servants fled the corridor without being told to, and by the time he reached the courtyard, his voice had dropped into something closer to a growl than a command. He recognized the symbol from her window immediately. He'd seen it once before, stitched into an old ally's collar, and it told him more than any confession could have. "Every wolf who can run, with me, now." Within the hour, a dozen warriors rode north into the dark behind him, following the only lead they had, a monastery whose name he'd learned from his own daughter's stolen map, less than a day before someone had used it to take her. Tessara woke to stone, cold and unfamiliar, her wrists bound loosely enough to slip if she was patient. She didn't remember much after the window, a cloth over her mouth, something bitter on her tongue, the last sight of her own boots left behind on the floor. The monastery smelled of dust and old candle wax, and somewhere above her, water dripped in a rhythm that never quite stopped. Auric crouched in front of her, patient in a way that frightened her more than shouting would have. "The Moonstone crown," he said. Your mother hid it somewhere. You will tell me where. I don't know what that is. It was the truth, and she said it as many times as it took, until his patience thinned. Children don't usually need to lie, he said at last, almost gently, which makes this so much worse for both of us. Your mother was a traitor, he said finally, quiet and certain. She sold this kingdom's secrets and ran the moment she was caught. Everything that's happened to you, the hunger, the cold, 12 years without a father, happened because of choices she made. Tessara's hands curled into fists. You're lying. She thought of the last thing her mother had ever told her, the words she'd carried through 11 days of rain like a second heartbeat. Never believe the people who tell you I abandoned you. Whatever Auric was, she decided, watching his patient, careful face. He was one of those people. She worked her wrists free that night, while her guards slept, and crept through corridors gone soft with rot and moss. A loose stone in the third passage gave way beneath her hand, revealing a narrow stair curling down into the dark. She almost didn't take it. The dark beyond it smelled worse than rot, old blood maybe, or something that had simply given up trying to be anything else. Then she heard breathing, slow, ragged, alive. At the bottom, behind an iron door someone had left unlatched out of carelessness or cruelty, Tessara found a woman chained to the wall, older than she should have been, too thin, scarred in places Tessara didn't let herself look at too long, her once dark hair gone half silver in the dark, but the shape of her face, the tilt of her chin, the woman's eyes opened. Tessara. The voice cracked, worn thin by months of disuse, but Tessara would have known it anywhere. She had fallen asleep to that voice every night of her life until 6 months ago. It didn't matter that this woman looked like a stranger, built from her mother's bones. Mum. They reached for each other at the same moment, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all. Tessara could feel every rib beneath her mother's threadbare dress, could feel her shaking, and understood for the first time that surviving and living were not always the same thing. They found me 6 months ago, Melivra finally whispered against her daughter's hair. 12 years of running, and I finally wasn't fast enough. I couldn't let you spend your whole life waiting on a mother who might never come back, so I made sure you believed the harder story instead of the true one. Her hands, thin and shaking, framed Tessara's face, like she still couldn't believe it was real. When they couldn't force the crown's location out of me, they kept me here instead of killing me outright. Leverage, in case I ever talked, or in case your father ever came looking again. I screamed his name the night they first drove me from the castle, 12 years ago, and I never once knew, all the years after, whether he chose to believe their lies or simply let me go. Footsteps rang out above them, heavy and many, boots on old stone. Mavra went rigid, pulling Tessara behind her out of instinct 12 years hadn't dulled. Then, softer, disbelieving, your father is coming. A heartbeat later, the monastery doors exploded inward, splinters of ancient wood raining across the stone floor, and Rhydian Vaust stood in the wreckage of them, crimson eyes, already searching the dark for his daughter, and finding, instead, the one thing he'd buried 12 years of grief on top of. Rhydian froze in the doorway. He had walked into this monastery ready for battle, for blood, for anything except the sight in front of him now. A woman chained against stone, dust and dark, and 12 years between them, and somehow, impossibly, alive. His knees nearly buckled. The Alpha King of the Moonfang Dominion, who had faced down armies without blinking, stood in a shattered doorway and felt his legs threaten to give out beneath him. 12 years of grief had calcified into something he'd mistaken for certainty. He had told himself so many times that Maevra was gone, that grieving a memory was safer than hoping for a ghost, that some quiet part of him had actually believed it. He had been wrong about almost everything. Maevra. Her name came out broken, barely a word at all. Behind him, his warriors fanned out through the ruined doorway, weapons still raised, but none of them moved to advance. Even wolves who had never known her seemed to sense they'd stumbled into something too fragile for violence. She didn't run to him. She didn't reach for him the way Tessara had. She simply looked at him, the way a person looks at a debt finally come due. Tessara stood between them, one hand still fisted in her mother's sleeve, watching the father she'd known for 3 days meet the mother she'd thought she'd lost forever, understanding, in the way children sometimes understand more than adults expect, that neither of them knew how to do this. "I begged them," she said quietly, "the night they took me. I begged the guards to let me speak to you, just once, and they laughed and dragged me out through the servants' gate, so no one would hear me screaming your name. Mavra, I tried to come back." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. After Tessara was born, half-starved and terrified, I came within a mile of these walls. Oryx's men found me first. They told me plainly, "Come one step closer, and the child dies before she takes her first breath outside a blanket." I believed them. I had no reason not to. They'd already taken everything else I trusted. Her hands trembled, though whether from cold or memory, Rhydian couldn't tell. So I stayed hidden. I stayed hidden for 11 years to keep our daughter breathing, and every single one of those years, I told myself you were somewhere hating me for it. Rhydian felt something in his chest give way entirely. Every year he had spent hardening himself against her memory, she had spent believing he'd simply let her go. "I have 100 reasons," he started. "Explanations. Evidence men I trusted swore to me under oath. I don't want your reasons." Mavra's voice cracked for the first time, the first break in her flat calm. "I want to know if you looked. I searched for you," he said. "For months. I tore apart every border village between here and the coast. You stopped." 2 words. They landed harder than anything Oryx's men had ever managed to. The bond between them, buried under 12 years of grief and fury, stirred for the first time. A pull low in his chest, unmistakable, undeniable, exactly like the night she'd first stitched his wound closed. His hand rose, almost without permission, reaching halfway toward her face, before he caught himself and let it fall back to his side. He wanted, more than he'd wanted anything in 12 years, to cross the space between them and pull her against him. He didn't move. "I will not ask you to forgive me tonight," he said instead, quiet enough that it was only for her. "You don't owe me that. Not tonight, not ever, unless you decide you want to give it." Something in Maevra's carefully guarded face cracked, just slightly at that. It was the smallest thing. 12 years of armor, giving by a hair's width. But it was real, and for tonight, it was enough. Then the monastery shook. "Touching." Oryx's voice rang out from the stairwell above, unhurried, almost amused. Wolves in dark cloaks poured in behind him, surrounding the chamber before Rhydian's own warriors could form a line, outnumbered 3 to 1, in a space too cramped for a fair fight, and Oryx clearly knew it. "A family reunion. I do hate to interrupt. You're finished, Oryx." Rhydian's claws had already lengthened. 12 years of lies end tonight. Do they? Oryx smiled, and it was the smile of a man who still believed he held the winning hand. You still don't have the crown, and you never will, because it was never hidden in this monastery at all. The chamber went very still. "Then where?" Rhydian said, low and dangerous. "Is it?" Oryx's gaze slid past him, past Mavra, and settled on Tessara, small, silver-eyed, standing exactly where the moonstones had once blazed to life beneath her fingers. "The crown has been answering her blood since the night she was born," Oryx said softly. "It was never buried out here in the dark, Your Majesty. It's been sitting inside your own castle for 12 years, waiting for her to come home and wake it." Rhydian's blood went cold. Every step he'd taken to keep his daughter safe had led her, unknowingly, straight toward the one prize their enemies had wanted from the very beginning. The wolves at the monastery were the easy part. Rhydian's warriors cut through Oryx's ambush in the time it took the moon to climb another handspan, though Oryx himself slipped away in the chaos, already riding for home with a head start neither of them could afford to waste. By the time Rhydian's group broke free of the tree line behind him, it was already too late to matter. The castle's outer wall was burning by the time they arrived. Oryx's allies, nobles who'd smiled and bowed for 12 years while waiting for exactly this moment, had seized the eastern gate and the armory before the alarm ever sounded. The kingdom Rhydian had built his life around was already fracturing into wolves, who remembered their oaths, and wolves who didn't. Smoke rolled across the courtyard, where feast tables had stood only days before, and somewhere in the dark, a horn sounded the old call to arms that hadn't been used in Rhydian's lifetime. Rhydian didn't hesitate. "Get them to the throne chamber," he told his captain, already turning toward the fighting at the gate. To Maevra, "Go, both of you. I'll hold as long as I can. I'm not leaving you again. You're not leaving me. You're protecting our daughter. Let me do the same." For a moment, 12 years and everything unsaid passed between them in a single look. She held his gaze a moment longer, then ran, pulling Tessara with her. Tessara had almost forgotten the map stitched inside her mother's dress, until she saw, half lit by fire through a shattered window, the exact shape of the corridor they were running through. "Wait!" She grabbed her mother's sleeve. "The embroidery. It wasn't only a path to the monastery, it's the whole castle." One silver wolf, stitched mid-leap along the hem, pointed down a servant's stair Tessara had never noticed before, straight toward a chamber that shouldn't have existed beneath the throne room floor. They ran. Behind them, the sounds of fighting grew fainter, then, worse, closer again, as if the battle itself were chasing them down through the old stone. The chamber was small, ancient, and utterly still, a single stone pedestal at its center, and resting on it, a crown of dark moonstone that seemed to drink the torchlight rather than reflect it. Maevra reached for it first. Nothing happened. Maevra stared down at her own hands, as if they'd betrayed her. Tessara's hands were shaking. She didn't know what the crown might do to her, only that it was the only thing left standing between her family and everyone trying to destroy it. She stepped forward instead, and the moment her fingers closed around it, the crown answered, warmth flooding up her arm. Not painful, more like recognition, like something ancient had been waiting 12 years just to learn her name. Silver light exploded outward, filling the chamber and pouring up through every crack in the stone above. Visible, Rhydian would later learn, from every window in the castle. Within the light, memories that weren't anyone's own played out like ghosts. Auric, 12 years younger, dictating forged letters by candlelight. A guard, paid in gold that glinted even in memory, rehearsing a lie about the border. Guards dragging Maevra through the servants' gate while she screamed. The council, gathered in shadow, debating whether it was crueler to kill an unborn child, or simply let its mother believe they would. And beneath all of it, unmistakable and undeniable, Maevra, innocent, exactly as she'd always claimed. Auric found them there, flanked by the last of his loyal wolves, his composure finally, completely gone. "No," he said, staring at the light. "No, that's not." Rhydian didn't let him finish. He hit Auric with the full weight of 12 years, and the fight that followed wasn't strategy, it was grief given claws. Chairs shattered, old stone cracked beneath them. Auric fought like a man who had always known this reckoning was coming, and had simply hoped to die of old age first. Cornered and desperate, he lunged for Tessara instead of Rhydian, a blade flashing toward the one target he knew would end this in his favor. Rhydian was a half-second too far away. Maevra wasn't. She drove a seamstress's iron shears into Auric's arm with the same steady hand that had once closed a king's wound, and the blade meant for her daughter clattered uselessly to the stone. Auric screamed, more fury than pain, and staggered back, long enough for Rhydian to close the distance between them for good. Rhydian finished it. He had Auric pinned beneath him, throat exposed, every instinct in his wolf howling for the killing blow the man had earned 12 times over. He didn't take it. "Kill me," Auric spat, "and you're no better than the council you're so eager to condemn." "No," Rhydian said. "I'm going to let you live long enough to hear every wolf in this kingdom learn exactly what you did." By dawn, the silver light had faded, but what it had shown could not be unseen. The council's conspiracy stood exposed before the entire Dominion, and for the first time in 12 years, no one doubted the truth of Maevra Wren. 12 years of lies had taken a single night of silver light to unmake. The kingdom was quiet, for the first time in 12 years. It took 3 days for the council chamber to finish confirming what everyone already knew, And at the end of it, Tessara Wren was formally named daughter of Rhydian Vaust and heir to the Moonfang throne, with not a single voice raised in objection. Even Bramble, smuggled into the back of the hall in his best, and only, formal coat, cheered loud enough that Rhydian had to hide a smile. She listened to the whole ceremony, with her chin lifted, exactly as she had the first time, and when it was over, she asked the only question that still mattered to her. "Does that mean Mum is the queen now?" The hall turned to Rhydian. He looked at Maevra instead. "That isn't mine to decide," he said. "It never should have been." That evening, in the privacy of the chamber that had once been hers, he did the one thing no wolf in the Dominion had ever seen him do. He knelt. The sound of it, armor and pride both meeting the stone floor at once, seemed to echo longer than it should have. Maevra didn't move to stop him, though every instinct in her seemed to want to. She let him stay there. The Alpha King who commanded thousands, who had never bowed to any council or crown, lowered himself in front of the woman he'd spent 12 years mourning as a traitor. "I should have trusted what we were to each other," he said. "I should have looked at the evidence myself, instead of letting frightened men hand me a story that let me stop hurting. I failed you, Maevra. I failed both of you. I cannot give you back the 12 years they took, and I won't insult you by pretending I can. All I can offer is the rest of my life, spent earning back whatever trust I have left to earn." Maevra let the silence sit for a long moment before she answered. "I don't want the Queen's crown," she said quietly. "If it means becoming the woman I was before. That woman believed silence would keep her safe. I'm not her anymore." "Then don't become her," Rhydian said. "Be the woman who survived instead." It was such a simple thing to say. It undid her anyway. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly. And for the first time in 12 years, that was enough for both of them. Tessara found them there a moment later, hovering in the doorway the way she still did when she wasn't sure she was allowed inside a room. Rhydian held out his hand. Maevra held out hers. Tessara took one in each of her own, and the three of them walked out through the castle together. Not a king, a prisoner, and an orphan, but simply a family, for the first time in either of their daughters' lives. Outside, for once, the sky had cleared. Tessara thought of the storm that had first carried her to these gates, and decided she liked the castle better this way. Warm, quiet, and hers. The original wedding dress was returned to the Grand Hall within the week, displayed once more beneath the candlelight. No one called it the betrayed Queen's gown anymore. The court had already given it a new name, the dress that kept the truth. Tessara spent whole afternoons in Seraphine's workshop after that, sketching alongside her mother, as Maevra designed a second gown. No hidden messages this time. No secrets sewn where no one would look. Just silk and silver thread, chosen because she loved it, not because she needed it to survive. Bramble, who had appointed himself the castle's unofficial errand runner for anything involving Tessara, kept sneaking in to admire the fabric samples until Seraphine finally put him to work threading needles. Months later, the kingdom gathered again, beneath a clear autumn sky for a second mating ceremony. Tessara stood between her parents at the altar, exactly where she'd always wanted to be, while the wolves of the Moonfang Dominion watched the woman they'd once called a traitor walk forward as their true and rightful queen. No one objected this time. No one dared. Oryx was not there to see it. He had already been stripped of his title and land, sentenced by the very court he'd once controlled, and sent to spend the rest of his life exactly as far from a crown as he had once tried to force his way toward one. Afterward, an old noblewoman asked Rhydian the question half the kingdom had wondered for 12 years. Why he'd kept Maevra's name stitched inside that first ruined gown all this time. Rhydian looked at his wife. "Because they tried to erase her from my kingdom," he said. "They forgot they could never erase her from my heart." Maevra took his hand. Tessara smiled up at both of them, silver eyes catching the same full moon that had once watched her mother dragged from these gates, and now watched, 12 years later, a family finally standing whole beneath it. The abandoned bride had come home. The hidden heir had been found. And the Alpha King who once ruled through fear had finally learned what love actually required. Not proof, not evidence, not certainty. Just the choice to believe the person who held your heart, even when the whole world told you not to. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments. Your voice decides what I write next. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more moonlit love stories like this one.